Cyrene's right around the corner. This is my very honest pulley recommendation based on the meta for version 3.6. In the first half, we have Evernight and the Herta. The Herta is the best 5-target erudition unit right now. She has been extremely meta-relevant for the previous few patches with lots of ice AoE stages, and despite her strength in the meta, I actually don't recommend getting the Herta at E0 unless you already have E1 and going up to E2. Her greatest weakness is the number of interpretation stacks and energy the less enemies there are, which is why Anaxa is one of the best secondary DPS units in Memory of Chaos and Apocalyptic Shadow in order to help the Herta better deal with these low target scenarios that will happen when you defeat some of the weaker mobs. Sure, she gets a huge damage number and it can be satisfying with an enhanced skill, but she is going to be overshadowed by Evernight's release, and putting them on the same half makes it an even easier choice. If you haven't watched my Evernight review, you should, by the way. Evernight is one of the best DPS units on release, and unluckily for the Herta, Evernight is an ice unit whose best case scenario is 5 target stages, but still performs incredibly well at 3 to 2 targets, so even more versatile than the Herta. In fact, she is probably our best 3 target E0S1 hypercarry DPS unit in the game right now, performing even better than Casteris hypercarry. But when paired with Casteris, the damage reaches new levels only seen before by previous E6 units, making a Casteris and Evernight team one of the absolute best teams to have in the game in version 3.6. The downside to Evernight is that she wants Remembrance units to function as best as she can due to her buffs mostly applying to member sprites, and we don't really have a lot of Remembrance units right now. Hence, having units like Casteris or Hyacinth in the present will boost both her damage and pool value. But it's also important to note that she's not as reliant on them as Casteris is reliant on Hyacinth, because Evernight's best teammate right now is actually Remembrance Trailblazer due to the fact that she can use the full 50% true damage buff from RMC. However, it's still quite hard for me to fully recommend pulling Evernight without both Casteris and Hyacinth right now in version 3.6. Just know that Evernight can still change her teammates in the future, like perhaps with Cyrene. On the second half of version 3.6, we have Anaxa and Heng Permansor Terrae. Like previously mentioned, Anaxa has a spot in the meta with higher target teams together with the Herta, where he plays as a secondary DPS and he cleans up the remaining units. However, Anaxa is also currently one of the best low target hyper carry DPS units in the game. Quite ironic considering he's an evolution unit. This is mainly due to his bounce attacks and insane damage efficiency in stages where many other units will be wasting damage, like the Herta or the Acheron. Anaxa's damage is rarely ever wasted, and hence even though he technically deals less raw damage than other units, his performance in gameplay can exceed those same other units. Some people seem to still think Anaxa hypercarry is bad, but do not be mistaken, he is one of the most meta-relevant DPS units in the game right now. The issue with Anaxa is that if you get more HP inflation in the game, despite his damage efficiency, he may struggle to keep up in the longer run, because at that point, damage efficiency doesn't really matter anymore, right? We did get a Cerebral banner recently that increases his maximum raw damage, so I believe it shouldn't be too soon where he starts to struggle, and I can imagine him being a great pull and unit for quite a few more patches. On the other hand, Heng PT is a completely free preservation unit we will be getting in 3.6, hence the only things left to pull are his Eidolons or his signature Light Cone. At E0S0, Heng PT is probably the best preservation unit we currently have, but he's not really anything special other than his unique mechanic that allows him to grunt and ally a summon. The best use of this mechanic is when paired with Sunday, as Sunday gives an extra 50% damage boost if the target has a summon. Because Sunday is currently very prominent and meta-relevant in a lot of the action-advanced crit hypercarry teams, Heng PT fits very nicely into a lot of this. Finon, Saber, Anaxa, Acheron, and even some teams without Sunday, like in DOT with Hyacinth and Kafka, can do pretty decent as well. Although his S1, E1, and E2 are pretty decent for him, sustain units will almost always have lower pooling or investment value, because keeping a team alive will not matter as much the more you invest into your damage carries. There's no need to keep your team alive if the enemies are already dead, right? Hence, I actually don't recommend investing more into Heng PT, especially with Cyrene coming on the next patch. This is speculation, but there is a pretty decent chance Cyrene will be great for your account in general, especially considering her importance in the current story. Hence, I recommend at least saving some pools for Cyrene. So from order of most important to least important pool, we have Cyrene and Evernight at the top, both very high value units, followed by actually Anaxa first, and then the Herta, and then finally by Heng PT. Personally, I think for completely free-to-play players, anything below Evernight and Cyrene should already be a save if you want to be really strict about your pulls. And the only unit I think is worth pulling for version 3.6 is Evernight. However, if you are more willing to invest into Eidolons, once again, Evernight has the highest value Eidolons, followed by the Herta, especially if you already have E1. It is important to note that Evernight has probably the best Eidolons in the game right now, because at E2 she already performs better than previous E6 units, and at E6 reaches 180,000 DPV, and as a Terrae crafter, I don't ever see units like go past 100,000 DPV often, so she's 80,000 past that. It's really, really insane. Light cones are again pretty similar. Evernight Signatures is going to be the highest value, followed by Anaxa and the Herta, because they both have very strong alternatives in Great Cosmic Enterprise, and today is another peaceful day. Once again, Heng PT does have a pretty decent light cone, but I would much rather you invest into your damage carries. However, there is one 4-star light cone you need to look out for, and that is Dance. This 4-star light cone is probably the best Harmony light cone in the entire game, maybe even the best light cone, and getting more copies of it is not a bad thing. The issue with pulling for 4 stars is that if you accidentally pull a 5-star light cone, that can screw with your PT, right? But Dance is such a completely broken light cone that really should not be in the game to begin with. It is so incredibly strong, so if you can spare a few pulls, try to get at least one if you don't already have it. Although my recommendation is quite heavily based on Cyrene being a good unit, there aren't many high value pulls other than Evernight and maybe Anaxa for the present. Hence, for most players, I'm still going to recommend saving first before deciding to pull more on version 3.6. But of course, if you can already clear content easily and you're just playing for fun, you're an endgame player or whatever, feel free to ignore whatever I said and just pull what you like. This is based on the meta, and I'm also honestly a bit worried we may get more power creep soon because the signs are kinda there. That's pretty much it for my 3.6 pulling guide. Happy pulling, or I guess happy saving for some of you. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.